fact that they are hiring at such a rate is both a corollary and a testament to the fact that that Russia is ramping up its overseas intelligence and destabilization operations.
So, Tom, if you can just start then simply by summarizing your piece and kind of what is going on in Europe at the moment with Russian spies.
Right. Well, we wanted to look at the apparent resurgence in Russian spying activities across Europe. So you only really need to keep half an eye on the news to realise or to have seen that over the last 6 months to a year, there's been a number of very high-profile incidents which seem to be covered in Russian intelligence agents' fingerprints. So, for example, there was the shooting of a Russian defector named Kuzminov in Spain. There have been arms depots explosions. There was the beating of one of Navalny's aides in Vilnius. So all of these things clearly seem to point towards Russian involvement. And so we wanted to look at how Russia, which seemingly was kind of, I wouldn't say down and out, but it was in many ways quite discredited at the start of the war because the preparations for the invasion, which were carried out by the FSB, which is Russia's internal security agency, which is also responsible for overseeing the former Soviet Union, had gone very badly wrong because the expectation from the Kremlin would be that Kiev would fall within a matter of days and Zelensky's government would be toppled, and obviously that didn't happen. So the FSB was underwent a bit of a purge. There were senior figures within that who were punished. Some were put under house arrest. Some were put into jail. And so the feeling was that Russia's intelligence agencies, which had always had this sort of dating back to the Soviet and even Tsarist periods, always had this slightly fearsome reputation. The feeling was perhaps that it was actually a paper tiger, in much the same way that people also thought of the Russian army following that botched invasion. So we wanted to look at, from 2022, from that moment of deep crisis and failure to the present day when it appears that spying activities have gone into overdrive.
Yeah, and we'll come to exactly what is going on now in just a moment. How, though, have Russia's intelligence services managed to turn the situation around from that point where they were in real trouble with the botched, as you say, invasion of Ukraine to the situation that we have today?
Well, I think that it was certainly premature to rule out Russia's spying agency. The country is run by a former intelligence director in Vladimir Putin, and the role of the FSB and its partner agencies is outsized by comparison with other, certainly Western European nations. The role that they play within society is huge, and the FSB in particular has an enormous number of staff. So I think it was always, to an extent, going to come back. But I think what's been surprising is in some ways, the brazenness of their operations. And some analysts that I'd spoken to said that whereas in the past exposure was, something to be avoided, it's no longer necessarily the case that Russia fears above all else that its operations are exposed. And you asked about how they are coming back. Well, there's a lot of a lot of recruitment of foreign nationals going on now, which is partly through necessity because of the fact that Russian agents across Europe have been expelled from European capitals, those that are operating under diplomatic cover, but also it gives them a level of plausible deniability if a depot in Prague gets blown up and 5 Bulgarians get caught, then it's almost certainly going to have been ordered by the Kremlin or Russia, but the fact that it's 5 Bulgarians and not 5 Russian nationals that have been caught gives them a layer of deniability.
So explain then the state of play now. Just how far-reaching is Russia's intelligence spying network in Europe?
Well, I mean, I kind of wish I knew.
Well, they wouldn't be very good spies if you did, really, would they?
Yeah. That's not really a question I think I can answer, to be honest with you. The difficulty is that they, as I said just now, they are increasingly recruiting people from outside the organisation. So it's kind of impossible to quantify how, or to measure the scope of their reach, because that they are increasingly hiring petty criminals who sometimes won't even, for the most part, in fact, won't even know that they're being recruited by a Russian intelligence officer. So they might receive a message over social media or Telegram offering them 500 quid to go and set fire to a particular building. And so, that certainly would count as their reach, but that isn't an FSB officer going and lighting the match. So it's in some way, I mean, it's something that's not entirely new, that the security services have worked with organised crime in the past, but I think this kind of employment of low-level criminality is something that is becoming more of a thing than it was previously.
And what does Russia say? How does it respond to allegations that it is doing this? I mean, we saw with the Salisbury poisonings, deny on the part of Russia, despite evidence that they were involved. So what do they say when confronted with accusations that they have these spying activities or clandestine operations taking place in Europe?
Well, they deny it, and even to an extent with the Salisbury poisoning, I think that was an example of them not only denying it but also kind of trolling, even in that it was so ludicrous, the interview the two suspected assassins gave, in which they discussed how they'd come to Salisbury and they'd heard about the repute of Salisbury Cathedral spire, and they were just 2 Russians on holiday together in Salisbury.
Yeah, very short holiday, wasn't it?
That kind yeah, precisely. And so that kind of thing, nobody is ever going to believe that, of course, but it's almost sort of a kind of game in some ways, I think, and thumbing their nose at the West with these sorts of trolling tactics.
Talk to me about Unit 29155. What is it and why is it growing?
Unit 29155 is a unit within the GRU, which is the GRU is Russia's military intelligence service, and it's kind of a mixture between the SAS and MI5 in this country. And Unit 29155 is the kind of the most active unit within the GRU for carrying out activities such as assassinations and political destabilization. So it's kind of at the sharp end of the GRU. And for a long time, it wasn't known about, and it was only revealed, I think, about 5 years ago. But it's the number of operations that it's been in, you'd have certainly heard of. So, for example, they were thought to have been the two guys that were thought to have carried out the Salisbury attack were 29155 officers. In 2016, there was an attempted coup in Montenegro that was also thought to have been carried out by 29155 officers. So they are highly trained and highly effective, at least when they succeed. And it's thought to have, in around 2022, it was thought to have had about 500 officers, but Ukrainian intelligence sources believe that number has now grown significantly, around fourfold to about 2,000 now. So the fact that they are hiring at such a rate is both a corollary and a testament to the fact that that Russia is ramping up its overseas intelligence and destabilization operations.
The picture we have then is a growing picture of Russian operations on two fronts. One is your, I suppose, conventional spy, or people from Unit 29155, which is growing. What they're doing, we don't, of course, know, but we know that more people are doing it. And then we have operations whereby it would seem that Russia is paying proxies to destabilize European countries. What's the sort of cumulative effect of that? What impact is all of this likely to be having on the war with Ukraine?
Well, I mean, the kind of ultimate strategy is to weaken the West. So, and that, of course, has a knock-on effect for Ukraine because the West is allied to Ukraine, and without Western support, Ukraine wouldn't be able to continue its defense of its lands. But then going back through history, it's kind of been ever since the early days of the Bolshevik Revolution, destabilization of one's enemies has been a kind of a cornerstone of Russian foreign policy, which initially took the form of attempts to export the revolution abroad. So it's quite sort of deeply embedded within the psyche of the Kremlin, that in order to remain, in order to advance its position in the world, Russia needs to constantly be undertaking actions which will undermine undermine anti-Russian leadership within Europe, whilst also promoting politicians and parties that are sympathetic towards the Kremlin. And the effect of all that for Ukraine is that, as I said, that a weakened and disunited West is more likely to stop funding Ukrainian arms supplies than a united and strengthened West.
And what's the evidence, or is there any evidence that it's working?
I think the Kremlin would certainly be quite satisfied with how the last 2 years have gone in terms of the level of political division within Europe, the rise of the far right, but also the number of pro-Kremlin parties and politicians in countries like Moldova, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Even in this country, when you see Nigel Farage saying that that the war in Ukraine was partly down to NATO's expansion into the east. So, yeah, on that level, I think you could say that there have been some successes, whether that's down to GRU operations in European capitals. I couldn't say, but the effect or the end point is certainly one that I don't think the Kremlin would be unhappy with.
Brilliant. Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you.